Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on Soundcraft Vi1000 Basic Training Part 1, presented by Gabriel Le Roux. My name is Mallory Misnarczyk, and I'm the project manager here at Harman. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter, and he'll try to answer as many questions as possible towards the end. This webinar will also be recorded, and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Gabriel, the presenter for today's webinar. Gabriel is a professional monitor and recording engineer in Johannesburg, South Africa. His 17 years of industry experience include studio work, large-scale live sound production, broadcast integration for Struder, and training and product support for Soundcraft South Africa. And I'll pass it over to you, Gabriel.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Mallory. Welcome everyone to Soundcraft VI Basic Training. We've got 1 hour, so I've selected all the topics that I think is the most appropriate to get you going on the Soundcraft Vi Series. So today's topics, I've divided up on the left the topics, and maybe on the right hand side that's what you want to take away from this session. So key objectives: you want a firm understanding of the layout, including Vistonics. We're going to talk a little bit about Vistonics. Basic setup of the console, including connecting a peripheral like a stage box, and then also how to create a show file and a snapshot, basic patching on the input and output side, and then routing of audio to a bus, VCA and mute groups, and then also the options when it comes to routing to effects. So it's all the basic type of features that you would want to know when coming across a VI console the first time. Great. Just maybe a little bit about myself. My name is Gabriel. Obviously, I own a business in South Africa, Johannesburg. I'm a monitor engineer by trade. One of my other passions is also recording, especially location recording when it comes to large channel counts. Most of the shows that I work on are variety type shows. It's interesting in South Africa because we've got 11 national languages, of which one is Afrikaans, and I do a lot of work in that market, and also in the gospel market. There's a few photos of shows that I've recently done. And then also system integration is one of my passions. I love to find ways to integrate different hardware from different manufacturers to work together. This is a design that I did for a Afrikaans show called Afrikaans is Groot, translates directly to Afrikaans is Big. And this was interesting because we had a 48K and a 96K system running together with some sample rate conversion, some playback, MIDI triggering, and also time code to tie video playback and lighting. Great. First thing we're going to do is look at hardware overview. Sorry if I'm talking fast. We just have a lot to get through this afternoon in South Africa, but I guess midday by you guys. So today we're working on a Vi1000. So Vi1000 makes out the smallest frame within this range, Vi1000, 2000, and 3000. In essence, this is an all-in-one console. The 1000, 2000, and 3000 is, for all intents and purposes, the same console, but in a different chassis size. We've got 96 inputs. We've got 24 stereo buses, 2 option cards, and another feature on this console that is lovely is that we've got a local MADI and Dante port. On the 1000, obviously, we've got the input fader bank on our left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side is our basically our outputs. I'll explain a little bit later how this console differs from the 2000 and 3000. Then going one step up, let's quickly have a look at the back of this console. I've chosen to look at the back of the 3000. The connectors and the ins and outs we have on these consoles are in essence exactly the same. Obviously, because of the real estate of the 1000, we have less analog in and out. But except for that, you'll find the same connections on all these consoles, exactly the same. At the top, we've got analog outputs. On the right-hand side, we've got our analog ins. You can swap these cards around, except for the output card at the bottom needs to be in that position. Then we've got a DVI output. We've got a MIDI in and out. In the session I'm doing on Friday, I'm going a little bit into this, how we can use MIDI to trigger something like, for instance, snapshots. There's also a provision made for an additional 2 USB ins. You can connect a keyboard, for instance, if you prefer typing on a keyboard. Then we also have a network port, AES in and out. There's a small little button there that I'm going to refer to later that allows us to reconfigure the system. We'll go over that a little bit later. Then in the middle of the console, we've got a local MADI in and out and a Dante in and out. And we also have clocking and then 2 option cards. We also have redundant power supplies. I always suggest running one power supply as UPS and the other one as hot power. Excuse me. This is just a closer look at the rear of a Vi1000, the console we're going to be working on today. And there you can see a close-up of the MIDI in and out, the USB ports and so on. What I just want to spend just 2 minutes talking about is this local MADI. The reason for this port is to connect to playback or to a server or recording. There is no control on this MADI port. So if you connect a stage rack to that port, you will not be able to control your high gains or switch on the phantoms. The audio will pass maybe, but there's no control on that port. That port is specifically made for extending the console when it comes to playback or it comes to your plugins. Another interesting and valuable thing to know is while that the MADI port and this Dante port, when it comes to the inputs, you have to decide whether you want to use the MADI or the Dante. It's either or. And this is something we change on the settings. When it comes to the output, whenever we patch something to channel 1 of Dante, it will also go to channel 1 of the MADI. So one scenario can be to use to do a main and a backup recording, of which one will be MADI recording and another one Dante recording. There's also a close-up there of the clocking in and out. Excuse me. And slightly faded in the background is the reconfig button. We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is the analog ins and outs of the Vi1000. As I said, the card at the bottom there always has to be present. When we start up the console, what has been done for us within the startup show file is the masters when it comes to master left and right, and then also our monitor buses have already been routed to these ports. Obviously, we can change them. So when you look at the back of the labeling, you'll actually see that's been done for us, and the console's labeled in that matter. Just to give a little bit of background, I've included the 2 bigger frame sizes, which is the Vi5000 and Vi7000. But there is a hardware difference when it comes to these consoles. These consoles have something called a local rack. On the right top there, you'll see it. So the DSP is disconnected from the control surface. So this is not a console similar to the 1000, 2000, 3000. This in essence is a control surface that's connected via network or a Cat5 to our local rack that controls, and this is also where we'll find all our ins and outs, and all our option cards will slot into the bottom section there, and our processing and DSP is happening at the top. It's 128 inputs. Here we've got 32 stereo buses. Obviously, local rack has to be there. We'll connect our stage boxes to this local rack as well. We've got the option of we've got 5 option cards that we can slot into this local rack. And something that's interesting to note as well, that the analog ins and outs at the bottom here, and this whole box is an active box, and the connection between this box, this breakout box, is BlueLink to the core. So BlueLink is obviously a Harman technology. It's one of the option cards that we have available. On the left-hand side, I've placed all the option cards that are most common, or the ones we work with the most. Obviously, BlueLink right at the bottom there, it's 256 channels. MADI Fiber and MADI Cat5 are probably the most common ones, and then obviously Dante is a format that we extensively use these days. There's an array of different VI cards. Line in and out, mic AS, 3G SDI, Dolby E, ADAT, TDIF, and on and on. Also GPIOs, RockNet, CobraNet, Ethernet, big selection. If you go onto the website, there is in-depth detail of all these cards. The 2 cards I want to spend a little bit of time on, just because they are the most common and the ones we'll find most, is these 2. So this is on the left hand side, we're looking at a MADI HD card. So this is the card that actually slots into the stage rack. On the left hand, we have obviously the fiber option, and on the right hand side, we've got the Cat5 option. I always like to think the Cat5 is more suitable for installation, but I guess you can use it live as well. And then on the right hand side is the receiving card. And this MADI card is the version that will go into our console. I just want to spend 1 minute just explaining something that's really important when it comes to setting up these systems, is that you can connect the output card of a stage rack to the input card of a console in 2 manners. The most common manner is when we've got 1 console and 1 stage rack, and we're running 2 cables, 2 fiber cables or 2 Cat5 cables, and the one is acting as the main connection and the other one is acting as a redundant connection. In this configuration, the switch where it says input select needs to be on redundant, which means the console will make a double connection, but the control will only be on one of those 2 ports, either the one or the other one. If the cable, there needs to be a disconnect of one of the cables, the console will automatically switch to the other port, and that's obviously how we get redundancy. The other configuration is to run the main output of the main out into one console, and then also take the aux out into an additional console. So this will be a scenario where the front of house console or the monitor console is taking control of the stage racks, and the front of house console is just following along. So the monitor console can also in that scenario has control over the gains and also has the outputs available on that console. The front of house console in that scenario will not see a stage rack anymore, but it'll be a MADI connection. And this is a very important thing to know when it comes to these systems and when you're setting them up, to understand that the console that takes control of the gains and also phantoms and so on also has control over the outputs. And then the other console is taking the split out, only needs to see a MADI stream when it comes to patching. This is why I refer to that little button that says reconfig. If in any scenario you set up a system like that where we're splitting the signal off, and you are seeing a stage rack on both, or the inputs and outputs when it comes to stage rack doesn't make sense, this is where we'll need to do a reconfig. So the reconfig is basically just looking at all the connections that's been made and setting up the console in that regard. Obviously, then when we save our show file, we're saving those settings onto our show file. Another good thing to know about these cards, when it comes to more complex setups, we do have the option of switching off the control on a card altogether. I can't go into the details of how we do this, but on the website there is in-depth description of how this works, and you can look at that. There's two sets of dip switches, and the furthest one is basically where you will switch on or switch off the control. These cards all ship with the control on and with 64 inputs and 64 outputs. So as soon as you introduce the stage box, the input channel will conform to that. Just keep in mind when you're connecting something that doesn't use control, like playback or a server, where the protocol on the control is different, you'll see all 64 ins and outs regardless of whether you can use them or not. And that's why this function is available if you want to limit the amount of inputs or outputs on that specific card. Great. Okay, so on the website, under downloads, is an article called VI MADI Fundamentals. If you want more, understand a bit more of how MADI works and how it pertains to VI systems, I strongly suggest that you go and download this file. It's the third one from the top there. It's called Vi Series MADI Fundamentals. It's a really good read to understand a little bit more of how MADI works and how it works on these VI systems. Great. So next up, there's two stage boxes. That's the most common is the VI stage box and also the compact stage box. Compact stage box is a little bit different in the sense that it's got an additional option card there. So the data coming in can pass through to that second card, and then you can play around with the dip switches on those specific cards to configure this rack to do a specific function. Most common rack that you're going to come across is this rack here, which is the VI stage box. And the most common configuration is 64 in and 32 out. Other stage boxes that are available are these two. They are Cat5 only. They will work on the Vi series. Obviously, you will need to run the Cat5 type connection. I'm going to switch over now to a top view of the console. So it'd be good if you can make the feed coming to you full screen. So at the moment, we're looking at the Vi1000. Obviously, we've got our input section on the right-hand side here, output section on the left, and outputs on the right. I'm just going to spend a few minutes just to explain where to find everything on this console. At the top here, we're looking at inputs. I'm going to talk about Vistonics in a moment and the whole thinking behind it and how it works. You'll see when I select somewhere on the screen, the console is jumping to that specific section, so that's our inputs. EQs, dynamic section, there's an overview of our auxes, so on and so forth. We've got rotaries at the top of each channel. Something that's good to know about the Vi series is that there's some of the features on the VIs are locked. For instance, on the rotaries, you'll be able to use the rotary for an input or gain or trim, threshold on the gate, or pans. And then there's also the user side, user definable. And that kind of methodology follows through on the input selection. So on the left, we're looking at all our fixed input pages. And on the right are the user definable pages. So just in simple, fixed pages, we can't manipulate where the channels are. They follow from 1 to 8, for instance, when it comes to bank A. When it comes to the user definable pages, we can manipulate them to be whatever we like. So in case this is user number 4, I haven't assigned anything there, but I can assign a channel if I like that. Same thing applies to the top here. The part that is not user definable when it comes to the output selection is VCA 1 to 8. So VCA 1 to 8 will always be VCA 1 to 8. A, B, C, D, and E. When we start up the console, they are all set up as buses, but we can also manipulate them to be inputs in this exactly the same manner. In the advanced features, I'm looking a little bit more into this. For now, we're just quickly going to look at where everything is. Our mute groups and VCA setup is in the middle here. And there's something that you should notice by now, and this is a good thing to know when you work on VI consoles, is the fact that the setup for each section is always right next to the button where you're going to use to manipulate. So for instance, when it comes to a mute group, the setup button is always there. It's not in a sub menu. So the whole methodology behind these consoles is to keep us on the surface and not in menus and to go through menus and menus and menus looking to set up a certain feature. When it comes to mute group or VCAs, it's right there. There's our mute group. And it's right there. Same when it comes to the setup of the pages. The setup of the user pages is right there. Same goes to the outputs. Same when it comes to these rotaries. If you want to change the function of user 1, the setup is right there. So if we want to make user 1 descend on bus 5, we just hit set. And now it's sending on 5, right? So before going into a menu to look for a specific feature, the first place you want to look is right where you're working. Then also same thing applies to our setup of our master, our monitoring buses. We've got a monitor A and a monitor B there. Setup of that's right there. The section here pertains to our snapshots. Section here is all our talkback control. Copy and paste is in this section here. Obviously switch the console on there. There's a little button there that allows you to mute all the outputs by holding it in. These rotaries are used for different functions, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Something else that it's good to note is there's 2 sets of buttons underneath each rotary. One is a function key that allows us to lock the strip or to flip to a second input, and isolation, which is recall safe, is another word for that. Let's quickly look at Vistonics. So the idea of Vistonics is we always work where we touch. That is the primary idea of Vistonics, keeping us on the console. In the same way, the setup keeps us on the surface and keeps us out of menus. Vistonics allow us to work exactly where we're looking and when we're touching. Similar layout to an analog console. I like to think that way. Inputs at the top, EQs, dynamics, our buses, output routing, and inserts. Something else that's very important to notice at this stage is that there is more than one view when it comes to Vistonics. There's the selection view and the deselection view. This is important to know because when it comes to certain functions, for instance, changing a aux to a matrix, so I've selected mix 1 to 8. When it comes to a setting like the type at the bottom here, we're going to take a closer look at this in a moment. You will not be able to change the type of this bus if you've selected something. So that's why it's important just to remember that Vistonics has got this double view. Something that's different from the Vi1000 that I've said I'm going to mention is that because of the real estate, all the other consoles, when it comes to Vi 2000 and up, we actually have a lot of faders to work with, which means it reduces obviously the amount of flipping we're going to do. And also something that's interesting to know is that all the other consoles have a little button called All Buses. When we select that, it spills all these output buses over all our faders. Just good to know. Within the scenario, the workaround would be to select on the screen. Also, good thing to know is that on all the other consoles, whenever you select a screen to jump somewhere on the console, this will always come up on the right-hand side. Just good to know. I'm just doing this just to demonstrate the workability and how quick it is to jump somewhere on the console. Other little features I just quickly want to mention is that when you look in, you can click and hold a layer to just momentarily go there, which is a nice feature. Same applies to our outputs, and same applies to our select buttons. When we select something, it comes up on this screen here, and if we let it go, it's gone again. So when we push the button once, it will jump there. When we just hold it in and let it go, we're just momentarily looking at this. This is very handy, for instance, when you're mixing monitors and you just quickly want to have a look at what's happening somewhere on a different place on the console. Great. Just the last few little view options. When it comes to metering, it's right there. Gain reduction. If I have to put a compressor on this channel, comes up underneath our input metering. Other views when it comes to the input fader is looking at mute groups. So if I set up a mute group, you'll see there's a red button, a little red light that is lit up. These LEDs are all multi-purpose. So when the display is selected to mute, we're looking at our mutes, but it can also display VCAs. So if I'm setting up a VCA, we're going to recap this, so don't worry about it. We're now looking at VCA 1, and so on and so forth. That's the basic layout of where we find things on the console. I'm going to now go and one thing I forgot to mention is fader glow. Fader glow is an amazing feature on the VI consoles. It basically tells us where we are, and you'll see even when it comes to input channels, the console is very colorful. You can label your inputs, and when it comes to our buses, the colors have been predefined. So when an aux is always orange, a group is always green, and a matrix is this beautiful blue. When we select them, we can see, so I'm selected, a aux. So this is basically flipping into fader mode. So now I'm sending into the specific aux called monitor 1. All the input channels are now orange, giving us an indication that we're not working on the main mix anymore. We are sending these channels into that aux. Great. I'm going to now switch over to Virtual VI. So Virtual VI is the software that allows you to basically build a show file offline. You can download this from the website. When you go to soundcraft.com and you go to products, you scroll all the way down to downloads, you'll be able to download this for your PC and build an offline version. This is exactly the same GUI that runs on the console. You'll be able to build an offline version of your show and then bring it onto the console. But one of the features, and this is what I'm using it at the moment, is a feature called mirroring. This is something we're going to talk about in advanced features. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that. So this allows us to make a connection and basically mirror the software with a console. I was going to use some music, but then WebEx doesn't like music, so I've just used, I'm using for audio today, just some comedy. So please excuse that, but that works better on WebEx. Let's quickly have a look at our inputs section. So maybe just dialing back a little bit. Obviously, when you come onto a console, the first thing you want to do is either blank the console to recall a default show file. So this is on the menu button here. This menu button is on the same place on all the consoles. It's just on the right of the main screen. The screen here. This is the screen we've previously used to jump to a specific section on the console. When we push the menu, it takes us into these tabs here. There is really not a lot of settings when it comes to the main menu. The reason is a lot of the setup, remember, as I said, actually happens straight on the surface. Like the snapshots are right there, talkbacks right there, monitoring setup, so on and so forth, which means a lot of what happens under this main menu is actually monitoring or global settings when it comes to the system. But you can, for instance, change the brightness of the screens. You can see your firmware there, and your time and date is also there. I always like to check what the time and date is set to the right time. The reason for that is that if we have a disconnect with the stage rack or we have an error saving a file, it's always nice to go back on your log and be able to see when it happened. If this thing is set to a weird date, then none of that data really makes any sense. What we want to look at now for today when it comes to basic settings is the show file. So I've created some show files there. If we want to recall a default show file, and this is the same on all the consoles, we select defaults, show defaults, and the options here is a front of house setup, also a front of house 16 fader setup, which is only on this console, but basically what it does is it spools inputs over both banks. It basically does that for us. And then also there's two starting points when it comes to monitors, one for 8 and one for 16 faders. Very simple, just load and you can save as a new file. I've already created a file for us today called Harmon. And then obviously at this stage, I always suggest making at least one snapshot. And in this case, I've made one and I've called it start. We can update it if we like so. I'm going to not dive into much into what's happening here. We're going to talk about some of these features when it comes to the advanced training on Friday. Unfortunately, we only have an hour today, so I need to talk very quickly. but most of these functions are self-explanatory. I'm going to look at tie lines tomorrow. We're going to still look at effects today. vMix is also one of the features we're going to talk about on Friday. This is just where errors will be locked. Some global settings like metering, enabling the next button when it comes to snapshots on the surface, backup intervals. I said when we spoke about the rear of the console, there's a Dante and a MADI that comes standard on the console. On the inputs, we need to select whether we want to use Dante or MADI, and this is where we do it. That function key, I'm going to demonstrate this feature later on. This is DARCS mode, which is gain tracking when it comes to the input and the outputs. And this is just some units when it comes to meter and so on and so forth. We're going to spend time on this Friday, but it tells us the health of our console, the health of our stage box, and all our network connectivity. Okay, let's quickly have a look at what we can see on this Vistonics page. So as you've seen when we worked with the Vistonics, the top part of this page of the Vistonics view is selectable. On the console itself, this part here is not a touch screen. So we don't push with our fingers here. We use the little button there to switch things on and off. It's just good to know. I know this sometimes can be a little bit confusing. Something else I want to point out that is very easy to miss is all the detail when it comes to this input section. We can actually see quite a lot. Like for instance, we can see our gain. I'm pulling up the gain on the console. There's some trim features there. It's good to note this because when you're standing back and looking at the console, it's always all this information that's coming up actually helps you a lot knowing what's happening on the console. Let's quickly have a look at the input section. We have the option of 2 inputs on every single channel. This is where we patch it. Very simply expand using this button and then select our patch points. Effects, these are our MADI connections, stage box, and locals, local, analog, and digital. We can have 2 patch points. The reason for this is obviously if we've got maybe for instance like a playback, like a main or a redundant playback, we might want to be able to patch them onto the same channels, or I often use this for my backup microphones, which works really, really well. I'll have all my artists, for instance, and on the second input of all these channels, I'll patch my backup microphone, which makes it very easy. I just hit the function key on the console, and then that backup microphone is going through all the same processing through the same channel, and it's going monitor-wise to all the right places. There's a gain. Obviously, when we patch a preamp, we'll also be able to pad it. There's an oscillator on every single channel, and a good thing to know about the oscillator is when you switch it on, it does not unpatch. It just for this moment, it overrides our patching and passes the signal from the oscillator or the signal generator. It's good to be aware of it. Once again, it turns the input section at the top yellow. When the oscillator is switched off, it can actually be confusing in the sense that you won't have any input on these channels, but you won't hear the oscillator. So just be aware of that. That can potentially get you into trouble. Oscillator is found under the talkback section. There's a trim up and down. The beautiful thing about this console, you won't be able to clip it in the digital domain, so there's a massive trim all the way up to 18 dB, up and down. There's a low cut because we've got a preamp connected there, and then there's also on every single channel, which makes part of the EQ, is obviously a variable low cut and high cut. When we link channel stereo, we can choose the format. This is where we pair channels. We can pair channels to the left or right or down. There's a phantom, there's a phase inverse. These are 2 patch points, and then obviously we can label our channel, and there's input delay. If you want to change the measurement when it comes to input delay, in this case it is set on milliseconds. This is something we'll find under settings, so you can make it meters, for instance, if that's your preference. And now it's in meters, you just switch it on. Something I just quickly want to mention when it comes to input labeling or output labeling is that there's a long label and a short label. So the long label refers to this label that's here. And the short label refers to the labeling here. So you can use one as maybe guest labeling if you're doing a festival type setup, and use this one as an engineering label. Or if in a broadcast scenario, you can put maybe RX 1 to 8 there and put the names there. A good thing to know is that it is a good idea to do both labels, the long label and the short label. The reason is that when you're working on the iPad, you want to be able to see the channel labeling, and you're looking at the short label, so it's good to know. Just to do it from the get-go, which brings an interesting scenario, because if you label the long label, you now have to retype the name a second time. So they've made provision for this. So once we do, let's change this name to whatever, say it was Mike. Number 1. Now we want the short label to have the same name. So we select it and we go backspace and backspace, and it copies that label across. We can also give it a color right at the top here. Always very handy. I love using the colors once you get used to them. You tend to miss them. So, and they come up at the bottom here. Good thing to notice at this stage as well, while I'm pointing there, at the long label there, it also shows our patching at the top, where our first patch point is, which is always lovely. Parametric EQ, I'm not going to say too much about that. Dynamics, we've got a gate on every single channel. Nice feature on the gate is obviously this high cut and low cut on the key in. So if you have a tom 1, you'll be able to rather dial out some of that low end, so the key is actually not listening to, say if it's tom 1 to tom 4 bleed. If that was the case. You can also manipulate the range. Except for that, it is a normal stock standard gate. The gate can also be changed, manipulated here on the right hand side to be a de-esser. Not going to say too much about that. It works very simply and is extremely easy to operate. That is something we can play around with. Each channel has a compressor, and it also has a limiter. You can use both simultaneously. So if you have a bass that you want to maybe compress the one way when the guy's playing normally, and when he's slapping the bass, you want to use the limiter, you can dial them in one at a time and run them both simultaneously. There's something I want to mention about when it comes to this compressor that is slightly different, is that the auto makeup gain. So obviously everyone knows what makeup gain is, right? It's got this function set that's called auto makeup gain. When you select this button, it dynamically adds whatever you're taking off, compression-wise. So it is quite dynamic when it comes to adding this gain back in. So I have actually used this quite often on when I'm mixing in front of house, which doesn't happen much, but when I do, if you're working on a lazy system and you're struggling with dynamics on a kick or a bass, you can actually use this function. Definitely something worth checking out. Then there's one other addition when it comes to dynamics, which is not seen here. But obviously, when you look one channel left, you can see there's something else inserted there, and it is this dynamic EQ. This only comes up once it's been inserted. So I'm going to just skip all the way down to the routing part of this channel. So we see the normal things. We see a left and right. We can assign the signal to the panning, left and right, center. We can change the mode from left and right to LCR. Then obviously we'll have a width. There's a direct out, also with a lovely trim. They can change the point, and same as always, patching expands when we hit this little button here. But the console allows us to insert an external insert, for instance, for a plugin that we can build. In this case, I've built one called that's a Dante in and out, and we can select it. It also allows us to insert an effects unit, and then also this console has 8 BSS 901s, which are dynamic EQs. As soon as I insert it, for instance, dynamic EQ 1, it comes up there. And in essence, this works very similar to a multiband compressor with the addition of an EQ curve. Next 2 tabs over, we're looking at the overview of our buses. In this case, bus 1 to 8 is an aux, 9 to 16 is a group. When we go 1 down, there's matrices here, but obviously we're not going to see them on the inputs. We'll have a look at that in a second. Something else that's obviously a basic feature that we want to be able to do, and I'm going to flip back to the other view in a second, is we want to know how to copy and paste. So I'm going to actually do this. Just a quick example. The copy and paste functions on this console can get quite in-depth. On Friday, I'm spending more time on this, but the basic copy and paste works as follows. If I'm adding a EQ on this specific channel and I say copy and I select it, the EQ, and I hit paste, it now remains within the memory as that EQ. Similar to a Mac or a PC actually. So I can copy that EQ there. Something that's good to know is once I've copied an EQ, even if I switch the copy off, once I hit paste, same EQ is still there. We can also multi-select more than one thing at a time. So we can say maybe we want to copy a dynamic setting. So say there was compression there, and we want to copy the EQ and the compression. We'll say copy, select both of them, paste, like so. That's the basic feature. There is very interesting additions to this. When we put a USB drive in, it also opens up the library. I'm going to have to talk on this on Friday because we don't have a lot of time now to look at that. Then, how am I doing on time? Great. We want to look at gang functions and also different ways of selecting, using obviously effects. I'm going to come back to the top view for that. Great, so we've got a good idea of where everything is. We've got inputs here, outputs, this is how we select it. We know how the rotaries work and what the options are there. So something that we obviously always want to do is be able to set up mute groups. I'm just going to go over that once again. For instance, if this was our panel discussion, we maybe want to add a mute group to that specific discussion to mute all of them. Very simply, select Setup, select the button that we want, the mute group that we want to use. In this case, there's only 4, which doesn't seem like a lot, but once you've set up your VCAs, you actually don't need a huge amount. This console's got 16. And we can multi-select to add a whole range, or we can just select the channels we want, deselect, setup, and now we've created a mute group. Also, same way to manipulate it, add additional channels in. Same thing works for VCAs. It's also something, there's additional features when it comes to VCA. I'm just going to show a basic VCA setup. Let's say we want to assign these channels to VCA2. We select Setup. We select the VCA that we want to use. It's already selected to 1, but let's say we're going to use 2, and we add them in. Or we can test whether it's working. Right, fantastic. Obviously, addition of a VCA, we can also give it a name. So I can call this something, panel. Great. Oops, double back. There we go. So now we can test to see if our
alcohol.
Ooh. Let's quickly do that. There we go. And then that VCA is controlling those channels there, right? Obviously, if we want to keep that in the specific snapshot, we'll have to update it. Great. Let me just check my notes quickly. Copy and paste again. I just want to go back to copy and paste because this is something that's not easy to see on Offline Editor, is that when it comes to copy and paste, if you look at the labeling at the bottom there, I know it's not that easy to read it, but we'll see channel 49 ending up at channel 56. When I copy a EQ, nice feature is, say if I copy the EQ and the compression, I can just drag them across and it will paste them all in. A good thing to know at this stage that does confuse some people, and I feel it should be part of this basic training, is that when you select the whole channel, use the select button, and you use the select button to paste over, you're also copying the name. So just good to know, rather select the parameters that you want to copy and copy them over instead of just using select. I think in a quiet situation, you maybe want to set up the one channel and then transfer all of that over. There's ways of clearing this very quickly. For the sake of time, once again, we're going to have to look at that on Friday. Great. Then I want to talk about gang. Gang is a very important feature when it comes to the VI consoles, because it allows us to very quickly set up certain features on the console and also change certain settings. For instance, pre and post, global pre and post. There's nowhere in the menu that allows us to switch a aux, everything to pre or everything to post. There's no global settings like that. But what we have is a gang button. So let's quickly look at what a gang is. It's this little button here. I switch it on, it goes blue. When I select these channels, everything is now linked together. So if I change EQs, was add in a low cut. I'm just going to do a crazy EQ there so you can see the change. So this is a tool that allows us to very quickly manipulate a bunch of channels. You can also do it over different layers. A very important thing to know is that we can have one selected there. If I lift this up, we are now manipulating also the channels on a different layer. So something I always do when I use my gang function, I switch it on and I clear it. How do we clear? We hold in one of those buttons. Now we're back to a starting point. That's how it works. Another feature when it comes to using gangs is obviously when we want to patch a whole bunch of channels. So say these were a backing vocal or choir section. Very quickly, we can switch on our gangs, make sure we've cleared it, select all the channels, go to the first channel in that specific range, and give it an input point. So I'm going to go local 1. It's asking me if I sequentially want to patch. I'm going to say yes. Now I've got a patch point on all these channels. Then I can very quickly do an EQ, right, like so. Maybe add a little bit of highs. And pull the gain, add some compression, and send it to a specific channel. And all the channels follow in the same manner. We can also use the same feature to unpatch. So I can select the range and then go to my patch point and say none. And now my channels are unpatched, which is a really handy feature. So that is manipulating a certain range of channels or specific channels. The gang function also allows us to change everything over the whole console. And how would we do that? We select gang, we hold in the gang button. And now I've selected every single channel, all of them are selected. Why would we want to do this? There's quite a few reasons, but the most obvious one, and I'm sure if I didn't say this, someone would ask me, is how do we make auxes pre and post? The pre and post button is there. Remember, Vistonics, we have to select our buses, otherwise the pre and post function is not going to work. I'm going to select pre and post. And now I can see monitor aux 1 to 8. And I can just dial this to make all my monitors, all these auxes pre-fade. Very simple. Great. Functions. Then quickly, one other thing that I want to just quickly look at is effects. There is 3 ways of using effects on this console. The one way would be to insert effects straight onto a channel. So, so this channel coming in there, we can insert an effects unit straight over the channel. We go to inserts, we select lexicon 1. Once I've selected it, it comes up on the channel. I'm going to switch on my insert. And now that whole signal is getting processed. Probably not the most common one to do, but it is there to use, not one that I often use. Second way of setting up an effects is sending it to an auxiliary, right? So let's say in this case we're going to use auxiliary 6. Our follow function is on there. Select 6. I'm going to send some channels there. For some reason I didn't make this channel. I didn't make this one pre. Let's go to one of the. We can see the signal passing on this specific auxiliary. Then when we go to this master bus, on all the other VIs, remember we can just select all buses. In this case, we have to use the screen to go there. We can now insert an effects unit straight onto the bus. So if for some reason you don't need a return, you can just use the insert. So we can say we want to insert an effects unit, say lexicon 1 again. Just going to make it a large wall so we can hear it nicely. I'm going to switch it on. So audio is still playing. Now when we listen to that aux, we can hear everything is swimming in reverb because it's sending into the effects unit. Then obviously we would maybe want to be able to return that to left and right, so we'll just switch on left and right, and that's basically it. Obviously, and then the most common way to use effects is to send our channels to a aux and then send the outputs of the aux. So just quickly, patching on a aux is exactly the same as an input channel. We've got EQs at the top. There's an effects unit once we've patched it. And then also there's dynamics available. There's a graphic EQ available. And patching is right at the bottom. So very sensible. Left and right, we can send panning. We can send, obviously, our aux to the left and right center. There's a phase invert, there's a low cut feature, and also a delay. If we need to delay it for a delay tower, for instance, we can give our output a label there, and then the patching there. In this case, we're going to patch to an effects unit, which we can make lexicon 1 again. Maybe just to recap this, when it comes to our buses, any of our 24 buses can be an aux, a group, or a matrix. I just want to mention this just before we run out of time. And how we change it is by deselecting our Vistonics, so nothing is selected, and then there's a type at the bottom. And when we dial this, we are now changing this specific aux to a group or a matrix. And then obviously we can decide whether we want mono stereo, and the panning, whether we want to follow the panning on the channel or have individual panning. So we're going to use this aux, we're going to call it effects. You can give it a color, called yellow in this case, and then send the output of this bus to an effects unit, effects 1. Once I've patched it, it then comes up there, and we can change it if we can to a drum hole if we like. So now I've got channels sending to a bus. The bus is sending to an effects unit, and we want to return it somewhere on the console, obviously. And switch that back on. So we've got signal passing there.
On holiday or on business? Some place you go to.
Great. There's our dry signal.
I have a Greek country.
Now we're going to bring the effects back onto the surface. So I'm going to use layer 2, and I'm going to patch a stereo effect. It's always helpful to do the pairing first. So I've selected the top, I select pairing. The reason why I say that is once we do the patching, then it patches the other side of the effects unit for us. And there we can see there's now effects returning on the specific channel. We can give it a color, like so.
The thing about staying healthy as I got older, I thought it was important to have a routine, to have regular nourishment that answered many of the...
Great. Just going to quickly go back to my notes. Then just lastly, we want to look just at recall safe. Unfortunately, I can't go into much details. This is one of the coolest features on this console is isolate and how it works. The console has something called full isolation and also partial isolation. So it allows you to only very specifically isolate or recall safe certain elements. If you build complex show files, this is definitely something you want to check out. I'm going to talk in depth about this on Friday, but the most basic feature is obviously when we have more than one snapshot, and say for instance this channel there, we don't want anything on this channel to change between snapshots. We'll hit our isolation. You can see it's become purple. And now when I skip between snapshots, that fader is just staying in one place. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Aux groups and matrices, I've spoken about it quickly, but just to recap, we've got the 24. We can manipulate them to be a aux group or a matrix, any of them, and any of them can be mono or stereo. There's two ways of sending to, actually 3 ways to send to a group, bus. We can use the follow function here and send into an effects unit like that, or we can use the rotary. And then another way of doing it is to just hold in the select button here and then using the overview there to send to that specific bus. When we look at groups, obviously sending to a group is either on and off. So you just use the on and off buttons, or you can go there. And then lastly, matrices. When we select matrix, you can see everything is blue. There's only one source setup. You can manipulate the sources any way you want. At the moment, what has been set up for us is source 7 and 8, which is left and right. The pick of point you can change there, so we can now say we want to insert a mic 1 there, like that. And now mic 1 will be sending to that matrix as well. Something good to know when it comes to matrices is when you use a matrix, these buttons at the top here become our pans sending into that matrix. It can sometimes be confusing when we're using a stereo matrix and everything is panned to center, then obviously it's left and right is going to be exactly the same. Great. Last thing, talkback. I love this topic. I can talk about this for very long because the talkback function and the monitoring function on this console is phenomenal. If you're a monitor engineer, please join me on Monday, the 8th, for an in-depth look at how the monitor section work and how the talkback section work and how the two link together. Unfortunately, we had to separate into a separate class altogether because it's quite in depth and there's some really amazing stuff we can do. I did just quickly wanted to talk about how to set up a basic talkback because it's something we have to do every single day. And I've got a microphone here. In this case, it's patched into, just quickly do this. It's patched into input 5. There's two ways to very quickly set up a talkback. The first way, or to connect it to our talkback section, is just to use this input in the front there. This becomes our gain. Gain it up, and that's it. The second way of doing it is to use any external inputs, in this case, or a different talkback source. In this case, I'm just going to grab this input called mic 5. And how we do it, there's a button that says talkback source. When this is blank, it uses that input. When we insert something here, it uses obviously the patch point that we have selected. So I'm just going to select mic 5. And the most common setup obviously is you're a front of house or a monitor engineer and you want to be able to talk to some auxiliaries to talk to the artist. There's a nice little button when it comes to patching. It says none. I'm just going to use that for a second. And I'm going to say preset 1 talks to the first 4 auxes. Preset 2 is going to be the next 4. Then once that's done, when we select preset 1, 2, that's going into an effects unit. Fantastic. And there's a third one there. There's some really other cool functions that I'll talk about on Monday. Please join me for that if you can. And that brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to talk about when it comes to the basic features. So if there's any questions.
Yeah, we actually have quite a few questions, so we'll do a couple of them. And if we don't get to yours, please feel free to reach out and we can help assist you. So the first one is there any big difference in the usage between Vi1000 and Vi1?
There is some features that's available on the 1000 series that's not available on the predecessor. But when it comes to normal operation, they are very similar. When it comes to just EQing or compressing or sending something to aux, there's not a big difference. Unfortunately, some of the features, some of the newer features like vMix, for instance, is not available. Also, the feature that I showed, the dynamic EQ, is also not available on some of the older consoles. But except for that, very, very similar.
Okay, great. The next question is, how does the control happen when Maddie is in 64 CH mode?
Sorry, just ask that question again.
Yeah, how does the control happen when Maddie is in 64 CH mode?
Oh, I'm guessing what the question refers to is when we're using a MADI card for playback. So obviously when it comes to manufacturers, every manufacturer does the control in a different way. There's no one standard when it comes to the control between a console and a stage rack. That's why you have to use a Soundcraft stage rack with a Soundcraft console. If you can't use a different stage rack, even if you convert the format, you'll receive the MADI stream, but not the data, not the control data that's coming back and forth. So to answer that question, you have to use hardware that can obviously talk to each other. When it comes to playback and record, I guess then obviously the control doesn't matter because there is no control involved. I think maybe another place when it comes to control, obviously, and I don't know if this is where the confusion came in with this question, is when I spoke about splitting the signal from the stage rack to allow 2 consoles to use the same stage rack. Only the console that is connected, I'm actually going to go back there just to reiterate. When we look at this card here, the output cards.
Hi, Gabriel. This is Raul. Hope you're doing well. Good afternoon, everybody. This was just related to whether or not most people understood that MADI was using the first 56 channels for audio and the last 8 for control data.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So that's what people wanted, some clarification on how we set that up in the card.
I don't know if you want to talk about that. I don't have an easy way of explaining that.
Yeah, we can move that to the advanced class, actually. It's an advanced topic. Tom there is on the call as well, so he could actually provide some of that input in the next 2 sessions. We have 2 more sessions coming up with you, so we can definitely dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think maybe just quickly to talk about that. I know once we've introduced the control to a specific console, the console will see and conform to that specific rack, but there's not continuous communication. That's why sometimes that's what I try to explain when it comes to the reconfig. if the system is set up in a certain way and we've got, say we had a show file with one stage rack and we add a second stage rack in and recall that show file, we might only see one of the stage racks. So to make that connection, we'll have to reconfig. I don't know if that explains the question well.
It's all good. We can move on. I think Mallory has
Okay.
more questions for you.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do a couple more because I know we're about 15 minutes over. So the next question is, can you expand on the concept and purpose of spilling?
Spelling.
Yeah, you're talking about the spill function, which was pretty fun back in the Euphonics days, where you could actually select an actual group and it would spill the inputs that went to that particular group for VCA.
The VCAs on the VI doesn't allow us to spill out. So
Yeah, that is a feature that has been implemented in some tutors. For us, that it's been discussed for the VI platform, and some might have some more information on that, but I don't think it's a feature we have on the VIs right now.
yeah, you can use a VCA. Obviously, once you solo a VCA, you can listen to what has been sent to that VCA, which is a nice feature, but it doesn't physically spill out. Obviously, when you mute the VCA, it will mute it, and when you solo it, you can listen to what's going to those specific channels, but there's no actual physical spilling out like on a studio.
Okay. Next question is, can you insert external hardware as channel plugins?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. That's what I wanted to explain, and I'll quickly go back there. It's right here. It's the inserts, and it's under external. So obviously what makes sense is to use something like Dante or the local MADI port to link to an external server, waves obviously, or if you want to have higher integration, obviously UAD is good because the real-time rack connects directly, and all the settings on your real-time rack can be saved in your snapshots. So how would we send audio? The audio path will happen like this. We'll hit insert. I'm just going to set up this one again. Oops. So I'm sending and receiving on, in this case, Dante 1. Deselect setup and select it. We can close this now and switch on the insert, which means the audio is coming in, it's going to that insert point and returning. There's a trim to manipulate the signal going there, and then also we can select the pickoff point to be post fade or post pre or post dynamics in EQ. That's simply how it's done.
Okay, great. The next question is, can I connect Vi1000 with another console from other manufacturers by Dante?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you would use anything else on a Dante network. Yeah, very simple to connect it. Obviously, something to just consider is that you'll have to set up a clocking master within that Dante network. And it's under the sync button there. This can be one of the things that is slightly confusing. Is it's always good to read this, whether you want the console to be the master or the slave. When it's selected on slave, there's actually the description that says use slave mode default if the console will act as the master for the Dante network. So when that button is selected, this console is now the master to the Dante network, and you'll have to put the same settings obviously everywhere else, or master if it follows from an external clock. But except for that, it will connect to any Dante network as per normal, yeah.
Great. So about 20 minutes past the hour. So before we sign off, I am going to share 3 links in the chat box with everyone. Yes. The first link is to our Harman Professional University so that you're able to access thousands of hours of curriculum, content, and certifications. This will give you an overview of information that will get you to the registration page to sign up. The second link is our playlist on YouTube for all our other webinars that have been recorded. And the third link is to our full calendar of upcoming webinars. Like Gabriel mentioned, he does have another one on Friday as well as Monday. Well, thank you, Gabriel, for your time presenting, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Should you guys have any additional questions or if we weren't able to get to your question today, you guys can reach out and directly to Gabriel or to us. Perfect.
Good. I've put my contact details at the left bottom there if anyone wants to drop me an email, or you're welcome to connect via social media.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Everyone have a great afternoon.